We thought we would do the discussion in French, which I hope everyone is still some like basic A-level memories of, okay, will that work? But no, I mean, it's difficult to talk about rare disease without having the AFM-Téléthon in the room, because really one of the true pioneers who have done so much for patients over the past 50 years plus now counting that the association has been active. So it's a real delight to have Alexandre with us today to be able to talk us through the history of the AFM, where they started from, what they've achieved, and what the next steps are. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk. But for those of you who don't know the AFM, I mean, be ready to be wowed, really, by one of the true pioneer of rare diseases. So let's start a bit with the story. And how can you tell us more about what's the AFM and how did it start all those years ago? It would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, so just first, before going a few years before, I would like to say how excited I am to be in this big event because, as I will say, the story of AFM starts in 1958 with the mother of 7 kids, 4 of them being affected by a rare neuromuscular disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So imagine at the time there was no electric wheelchair, rare disease didn't exist because the term was not invented. And all the health system had no clue about rare disease at all. And so it all started by parents and patients. And still now, we are a patient-led organization. Our board of directors is only composed of patients and patient relatives. And that's very important for us. So this group of patients started interacting with researchers, with clinicians. They quickly had a scientific advisory board. And for us, there has been one very important date, which is 1986. It was the discovery of the dystrophin gene. The dystrophin is the gene responsible for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And why it was so important? First, because for the first time, the parents had a cause for their disease. You can imagine that at the time, there were a lot of stupid ideas about why this child had problems. And most of them were not medical. So for the first time, we had proof it was a medical and genetic disease. So then they turned to the scientific advisory board and said, what should we do now? And they had 2 answers. The first one is you need to invest in genetics because most of these neuromuscular disease and rare disease in general are genetic. And in 1986, we didn't have the human genome. We didn't know about all these genes. So there was a need for investment. And the second answer was, you need to fundraise. And it seems easy to say, but it has been part of our success. So as you may know, the Téléthon refers to an American US TV show, more particularly to the Jerry Kids, which was a TV show organized by Jerry Lewis. And so one of our board members went in the US to look at the process and try to understand how to recreate a Téléthon in Europe. And in 1987, AFM was the first to organize a French and European Téléthon. Last year, the Téléthon raised more than 100 million euros. It's the biggest fundraising event in a weekend in the world. We were able to mobilize 280,000 volunteers. Just to give you a reference, during the Olympic Games in Paris, there were only 45,000 volunteers. There are 25,000 events everywhere in France. So if you come during the first weekend of December in France, you will have no choice but participating in the Téléthon. And that's, I will give you a secret. We are in a little group, nobody will know. I will give you the secret of the Téléthon. That's this event everywhere in France, which are the success, not the TV show. Because what makes a difference is that we have been able to have the whole population coming to us. And as I usually say, the secret is that we told them, come as you are. They just come and do what they love to do. They love sport, they do sport for the Téléthon. They love cooking, they do cakes for the Téléthon. They love playing lottery, they play lottery for the Téléthon. And everyone is involved, and that's very important. So first 2 dates, 1986, discovery of dystrophin, 1987, first Téléthon, which is already at the time a huge success. Sorry for my American colleagues, but we collected 4 times more than the American, with the population 10 times smaller. And so it's good. We got the money, but money doesn't make a difference. And so we invested in genetics, as it was the advice of our scientific advisory board. But we quickly realized that with the technology of the time, it would take a century to get all these genes. And so we bought robots, we invested in automatization, and we started sequencing the genome. And as you may know, in 1992, AFM-Téléthon published the first human genome maps, and we offered them to UNESCO so that it becomes a patrimony of humanity. It was very important for us for two reasons. First, symbolically, we have been able to fund this research thanks to the help of everyone, and it was important that the result comes back to everyone. And second, as a patrimony of humanity, you cannot put a patent on it. And so the reason why now the human genome is not patentable is thanks to these maps which have been offered to UNESCO.
That's fantastic, because it's not very well known, actually, that the role that the AFM played. Everyone knows Craig Venter, who sadly passed away recently, and all the big effort that led to the final map, but the very first works were coming from the Généthon. So after this first success, once the full map was published, what was your next battle? What did you move on to as an association?
So yeah, we were very happy to see that after the first human map publication, people were finally convinced it was possible to sequence the genome quickly. And as you know, it became a worldwide human genome project. So we thought, OK, we can now focus on something else. We got the gene. We know where are the mutations. Now let's find a way to correct them. And then we invested in gene therapy. Again, I'm talking about 1996, 1997, the really beginning of gene therapy. And so one of the laboratories we created, Généthon, moved from genome sequencing to gene therapy and started modifying AAV viruses to transform them in a gene therapy vector. And thanks to that, we were able to start thinking about correcting the mistake in our kids.
Yeah, and you had some fantastic success over those few decades of history. I mean, we have a couple of slides to showcase some of.
Before,
go for it.
So yeah, we'll show you one of the big successes, but I want to tell you how we came there. So I used to give this talk to patients and to families, and most of the times they know that the first big success was an immune system disease called bubble baby in 2000. First time gene therapy proved to be efficient. That means that gene therapy works since 2000. And still there are lots of diseases which are not treated. And that's usually one of the questions, when will it be for my disease? And so I have to explain why AFM-Téléthon has been funding not only research on neuromuscular disease, but all rare diseases or several models, because they have been required proof of concept. So we started with ex vivo gene therapy on immune system, because it can be done on a small number of cells outside of the body. Then we funded research on vision gene therapy. And Luxturna, one of the products on the market, actually comes from this research, because it was an easy way to prove that we could do gene therapy in vivo by injecting in a small, easily accessible organ. Then we have been funding adrenoleukodystrophy research, which is a brain disease, because we needed to prove that we could inject in a bigger organ, more difficult. And for the ones who listened to the Huntington clinical trials, that was the same kind of difficult clinical trial where you need to inject into the brain. And then we had to prove that we could have viruses injected intravenously, and which will be able to go and find the organ to treat. That's why we have been funding research on Crigler-Najjar, a liver disease pathology, again, to prove that it was feasible. And once all these steps from 2000 to 2015 have been done, then we could think about treating neuromuscular diseases. And so if I press here, I should have it?
Yeah.
Yes. One of our big success is SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, which is a neurodegenerative disease which can be extremely severe. Most of the babies can die before the age of 2. And this completely shows the work of EFM. In 1988, that's the French SMA family which came together for a DNA collection to actually identify the gene, because we didn't know what was the cause of this disease. In 1992, thanks to the map, That's Généthon, which identified where in the genome the mutation could be. In 1995, the precise gene, SMN1, was identified by a team funded by AFM-Téléthon. Between 2007 and 2009, the gene therapy was developed in Généthon, one of our laboratories. And then, as you know, there has been a clinical trial in 2015, which led to the market approval in 2019. And since 2020, this gene therapy is accessible and available in Europe. In France, we had to push also to have newborn screening program because this gene therapy needs to be applied as early as possible. So you need to combine diagnostic with treatment. And as you know, now this treatment is available worldwide, and it has been thousands of babies treated with this gene therapy. So that's, for us, one of the first and big success, of course.
Yeah, it's amazing to have been all the way from discovery to newborn screening, the full path of care
Exactly.
of patients. When in the UK, we still don't have NBS for SMA, which is hopefully going to change one day, but it's we're behind France on this one.
I thought France was the last one.
No.
But we are not the first on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's another great success that you can also share with the audience in Duchenne.
Yeah, so as I said, the history of AFM started with Duchenne, and now we are so close from a success with Duchenne. So again, that's the whole story. As I said, 1986 was a big event for France and for AFM because we had the cause of the disease. And we have been funding different steps, again, to be able to develop a gene therapy for Duchenne. Particularly, we demonstrated that microdystrophin, so a shorter form of dystrophin, could be efficient in patients and could actually provide some improvement. And Généthon has been developing a gene therapy vector with a specific microdystrophin that we are convinced will be efficient because it comes from a sequence from a lively patient, so we know it could be very efficient. And we started a clinical trial called Généthon 0004, the first trial in human with this gene therapy. A few patients have been injected. One of them is actually on picture. It's Sasha. So Sasha was injected when he was 6. He's now 9. He was one of the ambassadors of our Téléthon. And we didn't force him at all. But just to give you an example, it's a Duchenne patient, 9 years old. For the one who knows the disease, theoretically, you start being wheelchair or having issue to walk. This kid was able to climb the 300 stairs of the Eiffel Tower with no help, and actually faster than his parents. So for us, it's really a proof that it works. And so we validated the phase 1 of this treatment. And we are now in the pivotal phase. But the cost of this pivotal phase is extremely expensive. And so now it's very frustrating for us because we have been through all this path. We now have treatments we know can be efficient. And the finance, even with the Téléthon fundraising 100 million euro, is not enough.
Yeah, so that leads us, I mean, I think when we discussed, we said that the science is there. It's not a question of innovation necessarily, but what do you see then as the bottleneck that prevents great innovation to get all the way to patient if they're not necessarily purely scientific?
So there is the biomanufacturing, and I can say that the AFM-Téléthon has not only been working on science, but also on bioproduction. And Généthon has been able to develop technologies which can reduce the dose we use 10 times. So the dose we use for this treatment is 10 times less than any other gene therapy for Duchenne. But the clinical trials are still very expensive, like in any rare diseases. There are also some regulatory issue, and it was also highlighted by the Fondation Téléthon. The regulatory fee for these clinical trials and approvals are very expensive. So we need to innovate not only in science, but also in bioproduction, in clinical trial design, in regulatory process. Every step of the path should be innovated so that we can reach the end of the process.
Brilliant. I'm quite keen that we leave a few minutes at the end for questions, but I'd like to finish our discussion about your reflection on what's next, what's the future, what do we need, what new business model, or what direction you think now the AFM is going to move into after all those success over the past few decades?
So AFM is dedicated to neuromuscular diseases, but we have been investing in all rare disease, in the whole rare disease field. And clearly, the number of rare diseases for which there will be a sustainable business model will be very limited. We have been talking about it in other sessions about a non-for-profit model. We need to invent another model which provides access to the treatment to patients, which provides sustainability for the platforms which are able to produce and provide this treatment, but thinking about the classical business model where we will be able to have a 80% margin will not work. So again, we have been inventing ways of sequencing the genome. We have been inventing ways of bringing the missing gene in the cells. Now we need to invent a financial model which will allow patients to get access to the treatment.
Let's do it together.
Yes, and that's really why we are so happy to be here, because I met a lot of people who have this idea of innovation, and innovation at all levels. We have been talking, again, about clinical trials, so just because we would like to have a few questions. Before concluding, for you to know that AFM-Téléthon, I said, created a laboratory to sequence the genome because there was no laboratory at the time able to do it. So Généthon then moved to gene therapy. We created another laboratory on stem cells and drug repurposing. We created what we call the Institute of Myology, which is an expert center for clinical trials, because we also realized when we wanted to test drugs for muscle disease, that the classical assessment test is called the 6-minute walk test. So you want to test something on the walk for people who cannot walk anymore. So we developed other ways to assess the efficiency of the treatment on the strength of the hand, for example. We also developed a gene therapy bioproduction plant because we needed to produce GMP lot for our clinical trials. We also have a small VC called Ampleya, venture capital, because we needed to help all the researchers that we have been funding to move from academia to startups. So we developed a whole ecosystem that we usually call internally a galaxy, where all the pieces are there to go from very fundamental research to bioproduction to access to funding. But even with all these pieces, now we need partners. We need partners to move all these projects. Right now, EFM is funding 40 clinical trials covering 33 different rare diseases. We will not be able to fund all of them to the last step.
Thank you. I think it's a great call for collaboration in the field, which is the mainstay of rare disease. We need to succeed together. Thanks, Alexandre. It was fantastic. Thanks a lot. And we have time for a few questions for Alexandre.
Thank you. That's amazing, your journey over the past 50 years. I just had a question about something you said. You have literally moved mountains in your journey. You've done amazing things that were probably considered impossible when you started. What do you think is preventing us to solve this last hurdle of making rare disease therapeutics a reality accessible for people? What is stopping us when you literally moved mountains?
No, so first, that's why I need to remind everyone that we are a patient organization. I mean, if you're a pharma, you can change your strategy and decide to abandon oncology and move to immunology. When you are a parent with your kid in a wheelchair every morning, you cannot decide to say, okay, I abandon my kid and move to something else. We have no choice. So as patient organization, that's why we are able to move mountains. We had no choice. We had to move the mountain. And now we need to convince everyone. And I think all the people here are there for this reason. We need to explain what is specific to rare disease to the regulator, to the pharmaceutical company, to any stakeholder who could help moving. And because the next mountain, we'll have to move it together.
Time for one last question before we're being pushed.
Make it quick. So very interested. Well, first, congratulations. Thanks for all you've described and done. It's amazing. You said something about SMA needs to be treated when they're very young. It doesn't work so well when they're older. So that leads me to three sort of related questions. Why? Is the same problem going to happen for other rare diseases? And what does this mean for the ultimate possibility of using gene therapy for late onset diseases?
Very interesting question. So first, why? Because it's a neurodegenerative disease. So the more time you spend, the less nerve, or the more nerve you lose. And unfortunately, right now, that's very difficult to do nerve regeneration. So you need to do it before actually the nerves are lost. What about late onset disease? And for example, for Duchenne, that's a very important question. We designed the clinical trial to treat patients before symptoms or at early symptoms. But of course, we got a lot of patients in our patient organization saying, what about me? I'm old, I already have fibrosis, and the ability to reverse symptom is a very big question. And that means that it could work, but maybe in combination with other things. We may have to combine a gene therapy which will treat the genetic cause and restore the muscle, but in parallel also find anti-fibrosis treatment to actually readapt the tissue. And that's the same question for all the rare diseases. Once you got symptoms installed, how do you treat them? Very quick, I see we're out of time, but sometimes it also pushes innovation. As I said, we have been funding gene therapy for vision to treat the retinal cell. And when we did the clinical trial, we realized that if you apply it too late, actually the retinal cells are dead. So it's too late. You need not to replace the gene, but replace the cells. And it actually pushed one of our team in the Stem Cell Institute to develop retinal patches based on stem cells. So now we have two approaches. One is gene therapy when the cells are still there and can be recovered, and cell therapy when the cells are dead and you need to graft new retinal cells. So again, innovation in that case.
Thank you all.